Rachel had spent almost 45 minutes getting ready that evening. Not because she was the type to obsess over her appearance, but because something about tonight felt different. Like maybe, just maybe, this time it would actually be worth it. Her friend had been pushing this blind date for 3 weeks straight, texting her things like he's genuinely nice, and just give it one shot, you'll thank me later. And Rachel, who hadn't been on a real date in almost 8 months, had finally caved. She picked a simple black dress, the kind that said she made an effort without screaming that she was nervous, touched up her lipstick twice, and drove to Lumiere, a quiet, candlelit restaurant downtown that she'd always wanted to try but never had a good enough reason to go to. She arrived a few minutes early, which was very much on purpose because she hated the idea of walking in and scanning a room full of strangers looking for someone who might be looking back at her. The hostess seated her at a small table near the window, soft jazz playing somewhere in the background, the smell of butter and garlic drifting from the kitchen. And for a moment, Rachel thought, okay, even if the date is awkward, at least the food will be good. She ordered sparkling water, opened the menu without really reading it, and watched the door. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. She checked her phone. Nothing. She rearranged the fork on her napkin, took a slow sip of water, told herself he was just stuck in traffic, that these things happen, that she was being impatient. The waiter came by and asked with the kind of gentle smile that somehow made it worse if she'd like to go ahead and order or wait a little longer. She said she'd wait. At 7:14, exactly 14 minutes after their reservation, her phone buzzed on the table, and for 1 second her stomach did that small, stupid flip it does when you're hoping for something. She looked down at the screen. It was him. 2 sentences. Hey, really sorry. Something came up. Rain check? That was it. No call. No explanation of what came up. No, I feel terrible, or can we reschedule to this specific day? Just those 2 flat, bloodless sentences sitting on her screen like they meant absolutely nothing. Rachel set her phone face down on the table and stared at the candle in front of her for a long moment. She felt it. That specific kind of embarrassment that doesn't come from doing anything wrong yourself. The kind that lands on you from the outside, quiet and cold. The waiter was going to come back. The people at the table beside her were laughing at something. The restaurant was full of couples and small groups and people having a perfectly normal Friday night. And here she was, all dressed up and completely alone, holding a menu she still hadn't read. A smaller, more sensible version of herself said, "Just go home, Rachel. Order something nice on the way, get out of the dress, watch something stupid on your couch, and let this be a funny story you tell later." That was the logical move. The dignified exit. But something else in her, something a little stubborn, a little tired of retreating, pushed back. She had driven here. She had picked this dress. She had been nervous and hopeful and human enough to show up, and she was not about to let a 2-sentence text turn her Friday night into something she had to recover from on a sofa. So she picked up the menu, actually read it this time, found the pasta she'd been eyeing since she sat down, and when the waiter came back, she looked up and said very calmly, "I'll be dining alone tonight, and I'd love to start with the burrata." She said it like a decision, because it was one. And maybe it was that small act of stubbornness, staying, ordering, refusing to let the evening collapse, that changed everything about what happened next. Because 2 tables away, a man in a dark jacket was sitting alone too, nursing a glass of red wine with a folder of papers open in front of him, and he had watched the whole quiet little scene unfold without meaning to. He hadn't said anything. He hadn't tried to make eye contact. But when Rachel looked up from her menu with that particular look on her face, the one that was part hurt and part defiance, he noticed it. And without either of them knowing it yet, the night was only just beginning. The burrata arrived looking almost too pretty to eat, and Rachel was halfway through convincing herself that this was fine, that solo dinners were actually underrated, that she was a grown woman who did not need a date to enjoy a nice restaurant on a Friday night when it happened. She reached for her phone to put it on silent, just so she'd stop glancing at it out of some leftover habit, and in that small, distracted moment, it slipped right off the edge of the table. She didn't even have time to react, but the man at the next table did. His hand came down fast and easy, the way people catch things when their reflexes are sharper than their thoughts, and he held her phone out toward her without making a big deal of it. No dramatic look, no waiting for gratitude, just a quiet, "There you go," and then his eyes went straight back to his papers. It was such a small thing, Honestly, it should have meant nothing. But there was something about the way he did it. No smirk, no opener, no obvious attempt to turn it into a moment that made Rachel notice him properly for the first time. He was somewhere in his early 40s, she guessed, with the kind of calm that doesn't come from having an easy life, but from having survived a complicated one. Dark jacket, no tie, a glass of red wine he kept returning to between paragraphs. He looked like a man who was genuinely comfortable being alone, which Rachel found both slightly irritating and oddly impressive. Given that she had spent the last 20 minutes actively trying to feel that way and mostly failing, she thanked him. He nodded once. That was it. Or at least that's what it should have been. But then the waiter appeared from around the corner carrying a small white plate, set it down directly in front of Rachel, and said, "Duck confit, compliments of the kitchen," before disappearing before she could correct him. Rachel stared at the plate. She had definitely not ordered duck confit. She looked up and caught the man at the next table glancing over, and there was the smallest pole at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but close. "I think that's mine," he said without a trace of annoyance. "They do that sometimes. Table 4 and table 5. Rachel looked at the number on her little table marker and then at his, and sure enough, 4 and 5, sitting close enough that it was an easy mistake to make. She started to flag down the waiter, but he spoke again before she could. "You could just keep it," he said, and this time the near smile became a real one, brief and unhurried. "It's actually very good. I've had it before." Rachel laughed, a real one, the kind that comes out before you decide whether or not to let it, and said that she couldn't just take his food. And he said something like, "Consider it a welcome distraction," and offered to split it rather than wait for the kitchen to send a replacement. And before Rachel fully understood how it had happened, the waiter had brought a second small fork, and the two of them were sharing an appetizer across the narrow gap between their tables. They started talking the way strangers sometimes do when the circumstances are just unusual enough to dissolve the normal awkwardness. Carefully at first, just surface things, the restaurant, the food, whether duck confit was actually worth the price, which led somehow to a short debate about whether expensive food ever tasted as good as the memory of it. He was easy to talk to in a way that felt almost suspicious at first, because Rachel had been on enough dates to know that easy conversation in the first 10 minutes usually hits a wall somewhere around the 30-minute mark when people run out of their best material. But this didn't feel like best material. It felt like someone just talking, actually talking, without performing. She didn't ask why he was alone, and he didn't ask her either. And that mutual unspoken understanding made the whole thing feel lighter somehow. Like they'd both quietly agreed to skip the part where you explain yourself and just be two people sharing a plate of duck confit on a Friday night. His name, she learned eventually, was Adam. He didn't offer his last name, and she didn't offer hers. And for the first time all evening, Rachel realized she hadn't looked at her phone in almost 20 minutes, and more importantly, she hadn't wanted to. The main courses arrived, and neither of them made a move to pull back into their own separate evenings, which said something, though neither of them acknowledged it out loud. Rachel had ordered the pasta she'd spotted on the menu earlier, and Adam had the same thing he always ordered here, which he admitted without any self-consciousness at all. Like a man who had long since stopped pretending he wasn't a creature of habit. The candles on both tables had burned down a little. The restaurant had gotten slightly louder as the night filled up around them, and somewhere between the first bites and the second glass of wine, the conversation had quietly shifted from light to something a little more honest, the way it sometimes does when you're talking to someone you have no history with, and therefore nothing to protect. Rachel wasn't sure exactly when it happened, only that at some point they stopped talking about food and started talking about real things, and she hadn't noticed the transition until she was already in the middle of it. Adam asked her at one point, not intrusively, just genuinely, whether she was celebrating something or working through something. Because in his experience, people who came to restaurants like this alone were usually doing one or the other. Rachel considered giving a vague answer, the kind she'd normally give a stranger, something like, just a long week or needed a night out. But instead, she heard herself say the actual truth, that she'd been stood up, that the guy had canceled by text with no real explanation, and that she decided to stay anyway because going home felt like letting it win. She said it plainly, without performing the humor of it, just stated it like a fact, and waited to see what he did with it. What she didn't expect was for him to laugh, not the polite, sympathetic kind of laugh, but a real one, warm and surprised, like she'd said something that genuinely delighted him. And then he told her that staying was the best possible response, that most people would have left and spent the night in their own head about it, and that there was something he genuinely respected about choosing the meal over the self-pity. Rachel felt something loosen slightly in her chest when he said that. Not because she needed the validation, but because it was said like he meant it, without a single drop of flattery in it. She asked him, because it felt fair to ask, why he was here alone, and he paused for just a moment before answering. Not like he was hiding something, but like he was deciding how honest to be. Then he told her. He said he'd been coming to this restaurant alone once a month for almost 2 years. Always the same table, always the same order, always a Friday night. He said it started after his divorce, when his life had been quietly rearranged in ways he hadn't fully anticipated, and that one evening he'd walked into this place by himself, almost on impulse, and something about it had felt like breathing again. So he kept coming back. He called it his one standing appointment with himself, which he said with a small, slightly self-aware smile, like he knew how it sounded and had made peace with it anyway. Rachel looked at him for a moment after he said that, not with pity. He clearly didn't want that, and it would have been the wrong read entirely, but with the kind of recognition that happens when someone tells you something true and it lands somewhere in you that you didn't know was waiting for it. She told him that she understood that more than he might think, that she'd spent a lot of the last year building a life that looked full from the outside, while quietly wondering why it felt like she was always moving through it slightly sideways, never quite rooted. She didn't usually say things like that. She wasn't even sure where it came from, but it came out easily, without embarrassment, because something about the whole strange accidental shape of the evening had taken the pressure off. There were no expectations sitting at this table, no second date to audition for, no version of herself she needed to maintain. Adam nodded slowly when she said that, like he knew exactly what sideways felt like, and they sat with that for a moment, not uncomfortably, just two people who had said something real and were letting it settle between them the way honest things need to before the conversation moves on. Outside the window, the city went about its Friday night completely indifferent to any of this, and inside, the candles burned a little lower, and neither of them looked at the time. The dessert menus arrived and Rachel almost didn't take one, the way you don't when you're somewhere in the middle of a conversation that you don't want to interrupt with decisions about chocolate cake. But she took it anyway, held it without opening it, and kept talking, and Adam did the same. And for a few minutes they just sat there like two people holding menus they had no intention of reading. The evening had taken on a quality she couldn't quite name. Not romantic exactly, not the buzzy, performative energy of a first date where everyone is slightly louder and funnier than they actually are, but something quieter and somehow more interesting than that, like a conversation that had gotten off the leash and was just going wherever it wanted. She was genuinely enjoying herself, which felt worth noting privately, because 3 hours ago she had been sitting at this same table feeling the specific sting of being someone's canceled plan, and now that felt like it had happened on a different night entirely. It was somewhere around that point, dessert menus in hand, the restaurant thinning out slightly around them as the later crowd settled in, that Adam closed his menu and mentioned, without any particular build-up, that his company was hosting its annual fundraiser gala the following Friday evening. He said it conversationally, not like a pitch, just like something that had come to mind, and explained that it was a mid-sized event, a couple hundred people, raises money every year for a workforce development program that helps young people from low-income backgrounds break into the tech industry. Rachel said that sounded like something worth doing, and he agreed, and then he told her the part that mattered. A speaker had dropped out 3 days ago, a last-minute thing, and the slot was still open. It was 10 minutes, he said. Just a short remarks segment near the beginning of the evening. The kind where someone gets up and talks about resilience, about building something in your professional life that actually means something to you, about navigating setbacks without letting them define the direction you move in. He looked at her when he said it, not in a loaded way, just directly, the way he'd been talking all evening. Rachel tilted her head slightly. She worked in marketing. She'd told him that earlier. She led a team. She pitched ideas for a living. She knew how to stand in front of a room, but she'd never done anything like a gala speech, and she said so. He nodded like that was a reasonable thing to say, and then said that it didn't matter, that the talk wasn't about credentials. It was about having something genuine to offer the room, and that in the time they'd been talking he had heard more genuine things from her than he'd heard from a lot of prepared speakers. She wasn't sure if that was a compliment or just an observation, but it landed either way. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and set a business card on the table between them. Clean, simple, just his name and a number and a small company logo in the corner. Not slid across with any ceremony. Just placed there quietly, like an option rather than an ask. Rachel looked at it and then looked at him, and because the evening had been honest enough that she felt she could be too, she asked him directly. She said, "Is this actually about the gala? Or is this just a way of making sure we talk again?" She didn't say it with an edge, just with the straightforwardness of someone who would learn the hard way that letting things be vague never worked out in her favor. Adam didn't flinch, didn't over-explain, didn't give her the smooth reassurance she might have gotten from someone less sure of himself. He just said calmly and with no apparent discomfort at all, "Honestly, it's both." He said the gala was real, the slot was real, and she would be good at it. But yes, he would also like to talk to her again, and he saw no reason to pretend otherwise. Rachel sat with that answer for a second. It was the most direct thing anyone had said to her in a long time, and there was something almost disarming about it. Not because it was bold, but because it was just plain honest. No dressing on it, no angle. She picked up the card. She didn't say yes, and she didn't say no. She just slid it into her bag with a small nod, and when the bill came, they split it cleanly. His suggestion. Her acceptance only after he made it clear it wasn't a gesture, but just math. And then they were standing outside on the pavement, in the cool night air, the city moving quietly around them. And for a moment, neither of them said anything, and it didn't feel awkward at all. Rachel spent the better part of the next 3 days talking herself out of it. She'd pick up Adam's card, look at it, put it back down. She'd open a new email, type 2 sentences, delete them. She told herself she wasn't qualified, that 10 minutes in front of a room full of strangers at a formal gala was not the same as leading a marketing meeting, that she'd probably stumble over her words and stand there wishing she'd just stayed home. She told herself all the reasonable, cautious things that the part of her brain trained by disappointment always rushes to say first. But then she'd think about something he'd said that night at the restaurant. Not the compliment about her being genuine, though that had stayed with her too, but the smaller thing, the throwaway thing he'd said about how most people leave when they should stay. She'd stayed that Friday. She'd ordered the pasta and the burrata, and she'd let a strange accidental evening become something worth having. And it had cost her nothing except the decision to not retreat. So on Thursday morning, 4 days after she'd slipped his card into her bag outside the Velmorith, she called the number on it, spoke to his assistant, confirmed the slot, and spent the rest of the day writing 10 minutes worth of words that were entirely, uncomplicatedly her own. The night of the gala, she was nervous in the car on the way there, nervous in the elevator up to the venue floor, nervous standing near the back of the room with a glass of water she kept forgetting to drink. But the moment she stepped up and the room settled into that particular attentive quiet that audiences make when they're actually willing to listen, something shifted. She found her footing inside the first 30 seconds. The way you sometimes do when the thing you were afraid of turns out to feel more natural than the fear of it. She talked about setbacks without naming them specifically. She talked about the version of resilience that isn't loud or dramatic. The kind that just looks like showing up and making a decision to stay present even when something has gone sideways on you. She talked about building a professional life that means something beyond the title on a business card. The room was with her. She could feel it, that specific quality of attention that's different from polite silence. And when she finished and stepped back, the applause was warm and immediate and real. Afterward, people came to find her. A woman who ran a nonprofit asked for her contact information. A man who worked in brand strategy said she'd articulated something he'd been trying to put into words for months. Someone else mentioned a consulting project that needed exactly the kind of voice she had. She stood in the middle of all of it, slightly stunned, holding her water glass, thinking about how none of this had been on her radar a week ago. None of it had even existed as a possibility 7 days before. When she was sitting at a restaurant table feeling like someone's forgotten plan, Adam found her about an hour into the evening. Not immediately, not possessively, just naturally, the way the night moved them back toward each other. He said she was good up there, and he said it the same way he said everything, without inflation, like a plain fact. She believed him because of that. They had dinner again the following week, a real one this time, chosen deliberately by both of them, with no accidental appetizers or misdelivered plates, just two people who had decided, clearly and on their own terms, that they wanted to be sitting across from each other. It was different from that first night. Slower, more intentional, with the slight weight of something that mattered. And it was better for exactly those reasons. The man who had canceled on Rachel that first Friday never reached out again. Not an apology, not a follow-up, nothing. And the honest truth was that she never thought about him. Not with anger, not with curiosity, not even with the mild, faded kind of wondering that sometimes trails unfinished things. He had simply become irrelevant, the way things do when something better has filled the space they left. When people eventually asked Rachel how she met Adam, she told the story exactly as it happened. The blind date, the text, the burrata, the misdelivered duck confit, the business card on the table. She never dressed it up or made it sound more magical than it was, because she didn't need to. The real version was already the best version, and the part she always made sure to include, the part she considered the actual heart of the whole thing, was simply this: that nothing would have happened, not one single piece of it, if she had not made the quiet, stubborn, completely ordinary decision to stay.
Thanks for watching my video. Like, subscribe and share.